Okay, the two fundamental questions I have are this, to share with you our problem about trying to understand what we mean when we're talking about greening Dublin, what's Dublin, and secondly, what we mean by green. In the work we're doing with the Futures Academy, we're increasingly finding that there's a lot of sloppy thinking about what constitutes Dublin. Tom Coffey and his well-meaning associates think of the Dublin city centre business area as being Dublin. People think of Dublin City Council as being Dublin. There's the urbanised areas, and there's this gigantic thing that goes all the way from Wicklow up as far as Drogheda. They're all Dublin. And until we begin to clarify our thinking about the needs and challenges for all of those Dublins, we're a long way away from coming up with a solution to it. So I'm putting that question to you. When you come into this room here to talk about greening Dublin, to ask yourself which Dublin you're talking about. All these maps here are using a base of our colleagues from UCD, a very good map of urbanisation in the region. But what we're really trying to draw your attention to here is how that region is probably on the cusp of failing. And the little diagram that's taking place in front of you there is showing how regions like this potentially fail by turning into a donut, as these large yellow circles of newly emerging urban centres on the city fringe compete initially for building works, development, and eventually for finance and funding, and they cause the development of the dread donut city. It's a classic pattern all over the United States in particular. Irish planning, Irish law, Irish attitudes will drive our cities more toward an American than a European model, and we're right on the cusp of that. I can't go into the detail here, but when we're doing work with the people like the Chamber of Commerce, what we tell them is that Ireland has virtually no future facing up to the extraordinary global challenges that are facing us. And if we are to have any chance at all, the only chance we have is by developing the only urban card we have to play, which is the city region on the east coast of possibly 2 or 3 million people. That region has almost no chance if it continues to think of itself as a city. It has only a chance if it starts to get its act together to act as a region. So that's the question we're leaving you with in that sense, is which Dublin are we going to plan for, and how are we going to get as far as planning for that Dublin? And that Dublin could grow in a number of different ways. It could grow as these sprawls. It could grow as something that will develop a series of centres that might in some way contain it, as what we're charitably calling planned sprawl. So some thought might go into that. If we were living in Britain, in London, we might have a polycentric city like that and have that gorgeous warm bath comfort of a city like London, where there's 100 neighbourhoods that you can all call your own home and have a meaningful relationship with. It's a lovely thing. You can plan for that. You can work toward that. And as we move further into the continent of Europe, we might find models of increasingly planned urban centres till eventually we got to somewhere like France, and we would have the magnificence of a newly planned La Défense or something like that, where we have a second pole for the city. We have a city that's planned to grow as a second urban pole, and they can take different forms. They're all what are lying out ahead of us. So when you're thinking about what Dublin is at the moment, try and cast your net wider. When you think it's going to be going out into the future, it might be a profoundly different place, where the city centre here eventually becomes something like Washington, D.C., a national capital for symbolism and formal activities. I'm going to very briefly just deal with this business about what we mean by it being green, and challenge you to ask yourself, are you being sloppy in your own thinking? Do you mean Dublin is a natural thing? Do you think it's a vegetated thing? Or do you think that it's sustainable? And to just go at just two of the highlighters in that, because you're busy people, I think that the only things that are of relevance in terms of environmental city formers are probably diversity, biodiversity going out into the future, which is a fairly low-key note, and energy is a more significant one, which I'll talk about. And then finally I'm going to leave you with that most precious gift that you give bright people, which is a question, which is that we've got very surprising weak signals just emerging that I want to share with you and get stoned for telling you about. In terms of biodiversity, the main thing I want to tell you is that we are living in this extraordinarily natural city, and that we tend not to look at the graces that we have areas which are internationally significant wildflower reserves, right in the heart of a city of 1 million people. I'm very fond of watching birds, and myself and my old friend Roger Goodwillie have often been out on the Sandymount Strand watching those birds, and Roger has said that 10 days previously he had seen those same birds with polar bears in the background up in the north of Greenland. That's how wild our city is, and we tend to forget that. This is my favourite place for watching otters in the middle of Bowles Bridge. We have that in the middle of the city. So we already have it. Going out into the future of that is that we will start to treat it not as a series of sites and species, but we start to connect it together as a series of processes that we manage. So instead of rivers flooding and us trying to build flood walls to stop it, we start to plan the entire hydrogeology of the city and the region, and that flooding isn't something that's contained or even prevented, but it's accommodated. And that requires that kind of joined-up thinking of spatial planning and good governance and all the things that go with that. That's what most people think of as being green, and that's about as green as anything I have to say is going to be in the future. The main issue, though, to do with anything that might be green in terms of the city is for us starting to learn to think about the city in terms of energy. The frightening thing about our city here is the amount of energy that's used for useless journeys. The reality is it's the biggest single consumer, as Owen here could tell you from SEI in Ireland, of energy. That's what we use most of our energy for in Ireland, is for transportation. And most of that transportation is completely wasted energy on these short little journeys. They're not just things that are short, stupid journeys, but they're extraordinary pieces of social repression. This is some analysis being done out in the west of Dublin, and those two colours there, the wine colour indicates somebody who can walk reasonably to a choice of a shop or a bus stop. The blue areas can walk in a reasonable distance to either a shop or a bus stop, and most of them are just bus stops. And the rest of that place, where 45,000 people live, 45,000 people who have the lowest levels of car ownership in Ireland, have no choice but to do that. That isn't just an environmental scandal, that's a social scandal. That's a real challenge to get stuck into in terms of worrying about something rather than worrying about recycling your socks. The future is among us as well, and it's not something that is fancy or that needs any kind of extraordinary urban design techniques or methodologies. It's trying to build on things that we already know work well, that are humane and that are among us and that we can do now. And we can do them by aiming to improve just the livability of the city, by trying to create opportunities not for transportation and not for large engineering projects, but just for trying to make a city that is livable in, and is livable in by making people aware at a systematic level that they are going to buy into or live in something like this. The joke of putting energy labels on our fridge is that the energy label on a fridge in a house that's got an ecological label bears no information at all about the fact that that house is located 25 kilometres out in the countryside. Think about that the next time you look at an ecological village and ask yourself how much energy is burned every day travelling to and from that environmental village. These are the real and these are the uncomfortable challenges that we have to face if we want to meaningfully deal with issues of sustainability and not the ones that make us feel a little better as we lie around. I haven't come here today to tell you things you wanted to hear, but I might be telling you a few things that you need to hear. The technology is there not just to examine those things, but to use them as constructive tools. This is an analysis of the same type of issue in a part of Dublin city centre. With this type of stuff, we can do things that don't just involve improving connectivity from the point of view of having something that might cause a few less people to get in their cars. We can do it by actually building something that's at the heart of business in city centre areas. We can actually predict and build footfall. I could build footfall for you. And this is the type of an analysis, for instance, of showing how one tiny cul-de-sac being opened up here causes an increase in the redness of that whole area, creating dramatic potential changes in the footfall, and from that comes the business opportunities, and from that comes the social cohesion and livability of an area. It's there to be done. In terms of using the same type of thinking, we can do things that we have to do anyway. Some people are talking about having a potential ring route that does something like that across our beautiful Brent geese feeding and breeding grounds. But if instead of our city and its infrastructure being driven by people from an engineering background, if they were driven by people from a planning background who had a vision for a city that was going to come alive, they might do dramatic things like that. Take the same tunnel and don't build it out under the Strand, build it back under our own city. And suddenly, our city centre traders can have a huge multi-storey car park under Cleary's, under Arnott's, under Brown Thomas's, and we're getting our tunnel and we're getting our traffic solved and we're getting our city brought back to life and starting to fight the donut. And we could take it further and fantasise about having a city that isn't just a place that you're trying to keep cars out of, it's a place you're actively trying to bring cars into and use them and accept the reality that the car is with us and will always be with us, and that if we plan for that future, if we have positive, proactive planning instead of negative planning, we could have a city that would come back alive. And not just planning for cars. I arrived here on a bicycle. For the buses as well, the bus that I'm often the only male under the age of 60 on, the buses that move the majority of the people out of the edge of that city, bus systems that currently still are planned from the centre out, based on 19th century tram routes, instead of a city based on where people actually live and having the termini and the stations where those bus journeys originate from being the centres of the population density areas. And then that might lead you toward having a city centre which is dealing with mobility by having a very limited area of Lewis or metro-like activity. This is the type of thinking I'm trying to put in front of you to try to make you think that we have potential futures that are quite different from the ones that we're drifting into. And then finally, to leave you with these bunch of slides, one of my more brilliant ex-students is in the room here, and she knows what it's like to be subjected to this type of learning in DIT, where we try not to teach you things, but to teach you to ask questions yourselves. And we gave them this type of exercise here, where we say to them, I want you to go away and research something that you think is true. And the discipline is, all I ask you to do is to give us the longest time series of data on the subject from the most authoritative source you can find. And on that issue, that brings all of you here together in this room, because the name of your group is called the Climate Change Group, here's what our data is turning up. Weak signals means new information that's just coming into existence. This is a shocking series of diagrams that were done not by anybody with an expertise in climate change, but by an economist, plotting average Irish, in this case here, Dublin, rainfall from the year 1958. That's a very flat line. He then had the nerve to go off without asking any climatologist permission, and he mapped average Dublin winter temperatures, and that's what he got. And then he mapped, that was summer temperatures, and then he mapped winter temperatures, and that's what he got. That's not what the diagram is supposed to be saying. But we're starting to find more and more diagrams like this that are more and more causing us to ask if we are correct in what we regard as the fundamentals of things that are driving climate and CO2 policy. And what I do, the greatest gift I can give you, is to give you these uncomfortable questions. Another one of your colleagues was asked to go and map temperatures, not just in Dublin. In her case, she chose the longest time series she could find for temperatures in the Antarctic. And this is what she was finding at one station, at the other station. And in terms of the Arctic, the person who was asked to do that found this map here. This is going back 10,000 years into the past. And this is the present. Right? We do not live in a particularly warm world. And more uncomfortably, they were taking things from the front of Time magazine, pictures of polar bears on shrinking ice caps, and they went and they asked the most authoritative source they could find about what was going on with populations of polar bears in the Arctic region. And one area was increasing, and only one area was decreasing here, and when we scratched the surface of the area that was actually decreasing, it was actually decreasing because the tribe of people who live in that area make their living by selling their licenses for shooting polar bears to American tourists. That was the only statistical analysis we could find for anywhere with the most up-to-date region that had a declining population of polar bears. And this is the type of data we're getting when people go back and try and find out what's actually happening instead of what's being told. And then the single most worrying of all is this one here. You're very familiar with these graphs of temperature going up and down. This is all of the temperature graphs, the GIS, the HADCRUT, all of them, all on one map, superimposed one on the other. And there are two things I want to draw your attention to. In case you haven't ever looked closely enough at one of these maps, these are not maps of temperatures. These are maps of temperature anomalies. An anomaly is a variation around a fixed period of assumed normality and variations from that. So this is variations, previous slide. Variations from, I think it's the 1961 to 1990 average. And it shows two things. It shows 1998 was the last time we had high temperatures. We are now, in June of this year,
in the 12th successive year of non-warming. 12 years straight. A very uncomfortable fact. That uncomfortable fact is going to change this year if you've got your ear to the ground in terms of what's going on with climate. An El Nino event has just begun. Just today, the South Australian Met Service issued what they think is the first weak signals of it beginning. So you're going to see another spike like that. That's what that caused that spike. We'll see another one. And then finally, because my job here today was to make you think, is to look at this one here. This is the longest continuous, accurate temperature record in existence. It goes back to 1625 for central England. Summer, winter, and average. And it's definitely, this is of actual temperatures now. This is not of trends. This is not of anomalies. And it is not the frightening curve that we were being asked to look at. And when that type of information is combined with the most frightening of all curves, is the curve of CO2 levels, what we're starting to find is that things that we thought were truisms, that we had stopped even examining in detail because we were all so sure the CO2 was rising like that, when we plot them against one another, we find negative, positive, and negative curve fits. Now, if you're interested in science at all, science should tell you if this is causing this, the two should follow each other. But the emerging evidence is that they are not. And that's what I was asked to do, was to leave you things to think about. That's it.